Dr. Aries Arugay is visiting a fellow with the ISEAS Yusof-Ishak Institute, and he joins us now from Atlanta in Georgia. Dr. Arugay, thanks very much, first of all, for joining us. I want to start by asking you how you would rate President Marcos Jr.'s performance in his second year. Is it an improvement over the first, or is it worse?
I think overall it's an improvement, given that we know the circumstances that Marcos entered into power. The country was reeling after the COVID-19 pandemic and has a double-digit decline in its economy. But I do think that one thing that starkly could be observed is the end or the rupture of his alliance with the Duterte dynasty, given the resignation of Vice President Sara Duterte. And entering on his third year, Marcos might have to carve his own space without his alliance partner. And given that his approval ratings are relatively lower than that of the former President Rodrigo Duterte and Sara Duterte herself, Marcos will have many challenges, both economic and political, entering into his midterm in office.
All right, Dr. Arugay, we'll come back to that in a moment, but I want to also ask you about what a recent survey, a Pulse Asia research poll shows, and that is, Filipinos believe that that controlling the rising cost of basic goods should be the #1 priority for the government. Is that something that has happened? Because I don't think it was really addressed. How do ordinary Filipinos feel about this priority? And does this affect his approval rating as well?
Definitely, because Marcos campaigned on being able to address economic issues. He presented himself as an economic problem solver, and the recent survey showing that his government is not doing a very good job. In fact, his lowest approval ratings is on controlling inflation, and this is why his speech to Congress started off not on any other issue, but in trying to control inflation, particularly the price of rice. While this is laudable, it is also important to bear in mind that controlling inflation will require a lot of measures. And the basic question is, where would the government get the necessary resources to be able to curb inflation, given that there are many economic challenges, particularly in attracting foreign investment and being able to generate enough revenue to somehow help Filipinos address inflation.
And Doctor, the president also prominently addressed the challenges to Philippine territorial sovereignty in the South China Sea. What did you make of the tone and also the message conveyed in this speech? And how do you think the reception would be among Filipinos and the Chinese?
I think Marcos doubling down on foreign policy is playing to the strengths of his administration. I think there's a clear consensus among his supporters and generally the Filipino public that having a stronger stance on the West Philippine Sea and standing up against Chinese aggression in the West Philippine Sea is the way to go. According to polls, almost around 9 out of 10 Filipinos support this initiative. And therefore, Marcos is just being consistent in being able to define his own version of having an independent foreign policy that mainly stands up against Chinese aggression if it commits such acts. But we must also note that Marcos is not explicitly anti-China. And in fact, recent developments about a new agreement and in fact, Marcos's total ban on POGOs or online gambling, which is mostly owned by Chinese entities, should be welcomed by the Chinese Communist Party and mainland China, because they've explicitly banned this and asked the government to do the same.
Right. Dr. Arugay, very quickly, I don't understand this agreement that was announced on Sunday. They have different interpretations in terms of that agreement that was reached. Can you help us make sense of it? Beijing says one thing, Manila says no, we don't have to get permission to resupply, that ship at the second Thomas Shoal. What's going on?
Yes, because even if there's an agreement, it really depends on the perception of the parties towards that agreement. But what we can say is that this is a marked improvement from almost a month ago when there was direct confrontation, physical tensions between the coast guards of both countries. And of course, China will try to spin the agreement as something that Manila is trying, doing something less of what it's currently doing. But on the other hand, Manila is also trying to interpret this new agreement as a way of success in its transparency initiative, and but also to show China and the rest of the world perhaps that Manila would not want to settle these things through the use of coercion, and will still use peaceful and diplomatic means. It's unavoidable that there would be a difference in interpretation, because I think it will be a long way before both countries could truly and effectively manage their tensions. So I see this more as a stopgap rather than a definitive long haul arrangement between the two countries.
And Doctor, before we let you go, I just want to get your thoughts on this political conflict between President and also the VP, Sara Duterte. Some experts say that the current conflict and tension could put him in a favorable position. And by aligning with anti-Duterte factions, he could potentially forge a new coalition that could improve his chances in the upcoming elections next year. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. The elections next year will not be a re-election for Marcos, but it will be half of the Senate, the entirety of the House of Representatives, and local positions. But politically, we've interpreted these elections as some form of referendum on the sitting president. But I think there's a new dimension, given that it's quite palpable that Sara Duterte will run for president in 2028. The 2025 elections will likely be a proxy battle between the two, not only the two families, but the two politicians in particular. So I think Marcos has have to fill the gap or the space that the Duterte's left in his coalition. It will be quite weird if this will be occupied by the more pro-liberal Democratic opposition, because they themselves have said that they will work with Marcos on policy issues. They have convergence, but this does not necessarily mean a new political marriage of some sort.
Okay, we leave it there. Dr. Arugay, thank you very much for your time this morning. Dr. Aries Arugay is visiting fellow with the ISEAS Yusof-Ishak Institute.